So welcome everyone. Today is the first day of Crohn's and Colitis Awareness Week. And so we're holding this event tonight to talk about mental well-being. And I'm joined by a fantastic panel here who are going to be sharing their experiences and their top tips. And also there'll be an opportunity for us to take some of your questions as well through the Facebook page. So I'm going to start by asking each of the panel to introduce themselves, and then I'll ask each of the panel to talk a little bit about their experiences and their top tips for mental well-being. So to start with, I'll ask each of the panel to introduce themselves. I'll go around with people as they are on my screen. So starting with Hakeem, if you could introduce yourself.
Sorry, just checking that I'm unmuted. Hi, so I'm Hakeem. I'm a first year student mental health nurse. I've had Crohn's disease for 3 years. It wasn't a very quick diagnosis though, so I've been having symptoms since I was about 11 or 12. And then basically having lots of stomach issues and things like that for a long period of time that my GP told me was mental health related. Then in my early 20s, I had issues with fistulas and had about 3 surgeries for those. And again, I was told that it's probably my mental health. And then about 3 years ago, I ended up going to hospital quite unwell. And that's when I got diagnosed with Crohn's disease. I was given basically a purple pack with the Crohn's and Colitis logo on and read through it. And that's the first I heard of Crohn's disease. And yeah, so I've been living with it for 3 years now. And now I'm doing my nursing.
That's great. Thank you, Hakeem, for joining us. And Lo, are you happy to introduce yourself next?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can top such a good and detailed intro like Hakeem, but hi everyone, I'm Lo, also known as Lois, but Lo is just much easier these days. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease in 2015. A bit like Hakeem, had never heard of it before, didn't know much about it, so I've just been riding that wave for the last 6 fun years. And in my spare time, I run a blog and YouTube channel called Gut Instinct.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Lo. Kasia, are you happy to introduce yourself?
Hi, of course, yes. Hi all. My name is Kasia. I'm one of the specialist nurses in Crohn's and Colitis in east part of London in a small hospital. I've been a nurse in this, I've been nursing Crohn's and Colitis patients for about 6 years now. And I must say that the first time I've ever heard it back in the day, I also did not know what Crohn's and Colitis was, but I had a friend with this, and then it slowly took me, it took some time, then I got lots of interest in it, and here I am, trying to help out as much as I can.
Brilliant, thanks, Kasia. And Fiona.
Hello everyone, I'm Fiona Eldridge. I'm a clinical psychologist and I work in IBD and I work at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge. It's a real pleasure to be here today actually.
Thanks Fiona, it's great to have you here. So we'll start off then. I'll ask each of the panel just to give us their top tips on how to support mental well-being. And then we'll go on to some of the questions that some of you have submitted in advance of the event tonight. But keep posting up questions as we go through. So this event is about anyone affected by Crohn's or colitis. So you might have the condition yourself, or you might be supporting someone who does. And the challenges that these conditions bring can impact any of us. And so this session is for everyone. It's an opportunity to share experiences and suggestions supporting mental well-being, but remember that everyone's different and what works for one person may not work for others. So we won't be giving specific medical advice, but we will mention resources as we go along that you might find helpful. And we'll also be posting lots of useful links and resources in the comments so that you can seek support if you're finding things difficult. So we're here to answer the questions that people have put on the Facebook page in advance of the event, and also questions that you put up tonight. But we won't be able to answer every question. We also ask that you're respectful to everyone when you post comments and questions in the chat. So I'm going to go around the panel now and just ask them to tell us a little bit about their story and their own top tips on supporting mental well-being. So Hakeem, I'll ask you first, please.
Okay, yeah. So as I said earlier, a lot of my story was linked with my mental health, even though it wasn't strictly because of my mental health that I wasn't well. So over the years, I've developed a few coping strategies. So I guess my first one is that people often tell you to journal, and I heard that and recoiled at the idea of me doing a daily diary. So instead, what I do is when I'm really anxious about something or scared, I'll make a note in my phone about what it is and how I'm feeling. And I literally just keep this almost like a list. And then when I'm really scared again, I look back at it and I can see all the times that I felt like that and I overcame it. And it sort of helps remind me how strong I am. And it's a good way to look back at all the things that I've achieved so far. And it can be anything for me from like my first interviews for nursing, but then even I was quite scared of needles, and I have had my bloods done so many times now to the point where the idea of being scared of needles is just like silly to me, but it's still in there. It says terrified of having this injection. And then when they've changed my medication and things like that, it's the anxiety that I've got from that. And then I guess my other tip would be just to be kind to yourself. I think a lot of the pressure that we face is internal sometimes, because I often feel guilty if I'm letting people down, or I'm worried about people making plans, and like if we're all ready to go out and I suddenly think, oh no, I need to go to the toilet, and I kind of beat myself up a bit. So sometimes it's kind of just stopping and saying, you actually have an illness and it's okay for you to ask for some time to deal with that and to look after yourself without feeling too guilty about that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Some really great tips there. And yeah, being kind to ourselves. Really good point to make. That's fantastic. So I'm going to come to Lo next. Lo, can you tell us a bit more about your story and what are your top tips for mental well-being?
Yeah, sure. So I think, like many people, took a really long time to get diagnosed. I think that's kind of the thing that feels a bit of a recurring theme for a lot of people, is not knowing who to go to for help at the beginning, and then not knowing what to say, and kind of pushing and advocating for yourself, really. I think a lot of people struggle with that in the beginning, especially when a lot of people are diagnosed slightly younger. And it's something that, from my personal experience, I struggled with a lot. So I was right in my early 20s when I got diagnosed and I first started experiencing symptoms. I'd left uni, I'd moved to a different city, I'd opened a business, like all these things that I just put originally my symptoms down to stress. And being the kind of way that I was, and the kind of the friendship groups I surrounded myself with, talking about my toilet habits wasn't like the first and forefront of my conversations with like my friends or my boyfriend or anyone else I lived with. So I think that early diagnosis for me was really, really difficult to, one, find the courage to go to the doctors in the first place and kind of admit, like, oh, by the way, I'm going to the toilet 20 times a day and sometimes there's blood and mucus. Like, it's not really something you imagine yourself having to say to anyone at any point. And then, as I'm sure a lot of people have experienced, trying to kind of push through that system and, you know, doing the food diaries and getting multiple stool samples and gloved fingers in places you didn't think you'd have gloved fingers. So that was kind of my early journey of going through that really kind of long, arduous diagnosis process that many people have gone through. And then after that, kind of finding solace in a diagnosis and being able to finally put my hat on something and say, okay, this is what I've got. And now that I know that, here's how I can deal with it, with whatever medication I was prescribed at the time, and having those check-ins with my IBD team and my IBD nurse. And suddenly for me, that felt like, not like I'd come home. It's not like I ever belonged to the illness, but it finally felt like, okay, I'm accepted. People have actually recognized that my symptoms are not normal and I can do something about it. So my diagnosis was long and kind of scary, and there wasn't that much information out there. We're only talking 6 years ago now, but even then there was literally nothing. The internet landscape was very, very bleak, and it's something that in my first year I really struggled with. So I did fashion at uni, where I'd always having to be blogging, and I was very into social media, and, you know, I'm not afraid to say I'm a little bit vain, so like, you know, putting myself out there and wanting to look good and feel good. And I would be Googling as much as I could about Crohn's and colitis and trying to really educate myself on the disease, because I feel there isn't that kind of upfront knowledge and that kind of initial support when you've been diagnosed. So I'd be looking for blogs and all that kind of stuff. And there was nothing apart from this one blog. And if it was anyone's, I'm really sorry, because I reference it all the time because it was so terrible. But it was a dark, dark purple background with red writing that almost looked like blood. And I just remember the saying, like the heading of it was, I've been diagnosed with Crohn's disease, my life is now over. And just feeling like very personally attacked by that and thinking, I don't need this disease to be the end or bad news. Like, why can't we be living our best life and enjoying ourselves and trying to do what we can while still having IBD, rather than letting that lead the way of our lives? So that inspired me to create a YouTube channel and subsequently a blog and an Instagram page called Gut Instinct, which kind of documented my journey as like a young 20-something woman living in London, to be like, okay, cool, this is how I'm approaching the disease, it's how I'm dealing with it, and trying to just put a bit of humor and a positive spin on it, because I think there's nothing worse than feeling so constantly overwhelmed by it. So I think that's probably my top tip for, you know, mental well-being and maintenance, is just to try and find those moments of joy or those moments of positivity. And that's not to say that we all have to buy live, laugh, love posters and, you know, stick them on the walls behind us and all around our flats, because I'm not into that either. But I think just because you've been diagnosed with Crohn's or colitis, it really doesn't have to be this negative burden. And I think to try and find those moments of independence and joy and still being you and finding your identity, I think for me has been a bit of a game changer.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lo, and thanks for sharing your story with us. Kasia, tell us a bit about what your top tips would be. I would imagine this is something that you hear about a lot.
Lo has just touched on so many things that I totally agree with. As a patient, as a young patient, I live in and work in a quite funky part of London. Lots of young people are coming to us, lots of older people get diagnosed with it. And everyone's got a different approach, but I would agree with Lo saying it's not a subject that you discuss at the dinner table. So, you know, I often, when I speak to my friends about what I do, I turn this into a little joke, because I've just trained in doing endoscopy as well. So I now do flexible sigmoidoscopies and colonoscopies. So I have to start from a joke, because everyone is saying to me, "You're doing what?" And, you know, so if that's what people react like, it's very difficult to get diagnosed with this disease and be open about it. So I totally agree. So from our nursing perspective is talk to us, we're there for you. I mean, I am in a very small hospital, but we are a small team of 3, but we do our best to be there. We have an advice line, we have a phone. We obviously don't sit by it all the time, but we are our best to get in touch, to respond to emails. In fact, maybe I'm going a step too far. I have my work emails on my phone, and if I see that someone is distressed and I get an email at 10 p.m, I will reply to it, even just with like a little note saying, "Look, I'll call you tomorrow." So, you know, without talking and finding this connection, you're risking of you know, hiding everything in, and this way, this is impacting your mental health. So I think the best thing out there is to find someone to talk about it. You know, if you can't find support in your family, although I'm pretty sure that if you approach someone in the right way, there will be support. And, you know, we're there as nurses, and hopefully that's how, you know, the best tip is to try to open yourself to others and seek that help, because if you don't talk, we don't know that you suffer. So yeah, a lot of things that Lo said is exactly what I tried to do as a nurse, you know, just try to say to people, you know, yes, you got diagnosed, but that's not the end of the world. Don't put this red writing on the purple wall saying that's over, because it's not. It can be horrible at times. I can see that lots of people go through hell of a bad time, but, you know, just seek help and talk. So that'd be my tip.
That's great, Kasia, and I know that IBD nurses are a lifeline for many, so thank you. Fiona, can you tell us a bit about your experiences as a clinical psychologist working in IBD and what your top tips for mental well-being would be?
Yeah, sure. So you've all talked a lot, I think, about the stigma of the disease, and I think that's really, really important to kind of hold on to and acknowledge, really, because what that means is it makes it really difficult to actually go and ask for help and go and talk to people. And then you add to that the fact that it's quite fluctuating, and that makes it even harder. And then, of course, the fact that it's invisible to many people, particularly when you're coping and managing with things like pain or fatigue, or the urgencies may be a little bit more visible to other people, but the pain and the fatigue really aren't, and that becomes really, really hard. So I'm going to second what you've all said, which is just talk to as many people as possible, but know about the resilience literature. So there is a body of literature out there on resilience, and what it basically says in a nutshell is that what you do for yourself can account for about 8% of making you a resilient person, but the rest of what you need to do is all about getting support systems around you. So you're in the middle, and the more circles of support around you that you can get, the more resilient you'll be. So what that means for you will be about, and it'll be really interesting to actually just to hear what the panel think about this, but it would mean investing as much as you can on those systems of support. So going out with mates so that they're there for you when you need them, investing in family and partners so that they're there for you when you need them. So it's all kind of building up those areas of support, and your medical team is one of those support structures as well, but they're only one of many. So the more you've got, the better it is. So then when one crumples, and they will at times crumple, so when one crumples, you've got your other layers as well. And then the final thing is just really to have fun. So I know, Lo, I could hear what you were saying really importantly. And what tends to happen is when we feel utterly exhausted and utterly fatigued and in a lot of pain and having a flare, for example, we will cut out all the fun parts of our lives and just stick with the bits that we absolutely have to do. So that might be childcare, it might be work, it might be education. But of course, the long-term impact of that is that there is nothing to feed that soul of yours. So if you can just bear that in mind, that you can cope with that for a little bit, but after a while, it will be really important to just think, right, where can I fit in those elements of fun and prioritize those over the other stuff whenever I can. Yeah. And if you can do that, then hopefully the balance can be right. Do you think that's, just thinking low, Hakeem, do you think that's something that could be done?
I think so. I mean, I'd be interested in what Hakeem says as well, because obviously everyone's like story is so different and everyone's experience is different. I think it's always one of those things where you go through ups and downs, isn't it? So like obviously with especially IBD, you have flares and you have moments where your symptoms are actively worse, and I think it has that knock-on effect. You probably see it in the psychology aspect, where actually if you're physically unwell, you feel it's much harder. It feels like much more of a struggle to find that enjoyment or to feel positive about things, because if you're running to the toilet 20 times a day, or you are just absolutely exhausted and you can't make that time to see your friends or do cooking or whatever it is that you enjoy, you do end up, I've definitely found myself in the past being stuck in this very negative cycle, and it feeds off of each other. And almost, the more negative you feel, the more stressed you become, the worse impact that has on your gut, which we all know, outside of having IBD, anyone who's stressed will have a dodgy tummy anyway, and you kind of end up being in that cycle. So I think it's really important to find ways to, like what you were saying, Fiona, almost break that cycle, or just find those tiny moments of joy, even if it's half an hour in your day or 1 hour in your day, or someone who even it could be something as small as someone you enjoy talking to. Because I think with all of these things, it's very shroud at the beginning, unless you're like a super open, confident person, it's very shroud in secrecy, this kind of like illness. Not only, like you said, is it invisible, but people find it really hard to talk about. And it's like the whole poo taboo thing. And, so people don't offload, they don't share, they don't build that network of support because they don't want to talk about it, or they think their friends or their family will judge them or be like, yeah, that's gross, and just shut the conversation down. But I think the beauty of like these online communities, and like we're all sat here now having not met each other and, having these conversations, is you can find those pockets of people to talk to and have some fun with, and maybe just kind of build that support. And even if that's your joy, sending a message to someone on TikTok. If that makes you happy for that day, then that is definitely what you should prioritize. What do you think, Hakeem?
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like I have spent a lot of time on the actual Facebook forum, the Crohn's and Colitis Facebook forum. And if I'm feeling really low, sometimes I'll go on there just to look through and see if I can support others in some way. That always makes me feel a little bit better. Never giving out like medical advice, because that's not me, but just like general advice on like if I've experienced it, what I've done to cope with that. And also I find I'm quite honest with my friends. Who are talking about not talking about things at the dinner table and such, but like if I'm having a bad day, I'll explain to them why, and then I feel like it helps them to understand when they might need to pull me out. So almost like if I keep saying no to things, maybe take me for just like a 30-minute walk and just a little chat, and then sometimes you don't know it's going to make you feel better until you actually start doing it, and then that has a knock-on effect with the symptoms. And then also just having things to do that aren't Crohn's related, because I went through a phase like yourself of just going through all the literature I could find, watching YouTube videos, everything, reading about Crohn's, almost trying to find like some cure. And then I realized that just if it's all I'm thinking about, it kind of becomes my whole identity, and there is more to me than just Crohn's disease. So I'll play guitar and write songs, and I'll cook, which sometimes ends good. Sometimes you eat the wrong food, and then it's kind of like, oh, I'm thinking about Crohn's again. But I do try my best to have things outside of Crohn's, so that it's not all I'm thinking about.
That's great, thank you. And really, so I'm going to ask some of the questions that we've been sent in advance, and that actually ties in nicely actually with a question for you, Kasia. So somebody asked us, how can I work with my IBD team to maintain my mental well-being?
I guess, so I think that I kind of answered it before, to work with us, you have to let us know that you need us. Because I had a colleague who's also a nurse, but a Crohn's sufferer, who I've asked this question out of curiosity. When she was diagnosed, she was 16, and I've asked her, what was the best advice that you were given then? And she said to me, I just didn't want any of those nurses coming to me and saying stuff, because I felt like they don't understand how I feel. So I found it a little bit like, oh, maybe we're just saying, too much, to giving advice that people don't want. But, if someone comes to me and asks for this advice, and I can share what I know, then this is how, if Lo comes to me saying, actually, I've been fine, and all of a sudden I feel absolutely terrible, I'm going to the toilet 5 times, I thought I'm in remission, I feel horrible, I don't want to get out of the house, what do I do? I'll be there for her, and I'll do, from our side, I'll check her blood tests, we'll see what medication she's on, whether we can change anything, I'll ask what her life is like right now. Is there anything that she can change to make it, I don't know, maybe improve? Not everything can be found in blood tests. Lots of patients come with fatigue to us, and sometimes this extreme tiredness is not only explained in like low iron levels, because we can fix certain things with some, say, iron infusion or a vitamin, we can fix some medication, but not everything is that. We can adapt the way that they do things to their life, or help them change a few things, because this chronicity and fatigue in the disease is also a way of disease showing that it's being active and not fully controlled. So, if people talk to us, we will do everything to help out from our side, whether it's a medical advice or maybe some little changes. So again, we need to know, because I cannot guess. And if the, IBD, review is once a year or twice a year, I can only go by what I know about the patient. So if I didn't hear and I don't know they're suffering, I won't be able to help. So, I hope this somehow answers the question.
Yeah, no, that's great, Kasia. And that leads to a question for Fiona, really. If someone's living with Crohn's or colitis, it can feel normal to push through difficult days, and we've heard some techniques and tips for doing that. But how does someone recognize when they actually need to get some professional help?
So the answer of that is going to be different for every single person out there. So, you've got to look at yourself and not compare yourself to anybody else at this point, which is going to be quite a difficult thing to do. But then it's about trying to acknowledge how you're feeling at that current time. So the most important thing we try and get patients to do when we see them in psychology is to name the feelings that they're experiencing, because once you name them, you can do something about them. If we try and cover them up, it can feel really difficult to do something about them. So what we've talked about already is this kind of sense of actually often to get on with life. It's easier sometimes to just be able to put on a face sometimes and just go and do something. But that, I don't know if you noticed the difference of there. What we weren't saying was to not notice it's there in the first place. In order to do that, you kind of have to notice it's there in the first place to know that you're consciously doing something different. So naming and noticing and just staying with it and acknowledging it is the most important first step to do. After that, it's really going to be a decision that you'll need to make according to what's available around you. So if you've gone to the existing systems that you've got around you and you're feeling, I'm still feeling stuck, and your current ways of working, coping with things are not working, and you're not managing with those systems anymore, that would be a sign. And if you've tried and adapted and thought, oh, I can change this by doing this. So say, for example, if you have a period of time where you're in something like that and you're thinking about how you can adapt and change an activity, you might have normally met a friend out at a bar and now you're going to be meeting a friend, you know, over or having a phone call or have a Zoom call or whatever it might be, but it's still not helping, then that I would say is absolutely a time that you need to go and get some professional help. Don't leave it too long, because the waiting lists at the moment, you know, are high, particularly. So if you've got an IBD psychologist in the post, that's often, they're often high enough. If you're trying to access mental health services at the moment, they can be really long waits. So it's a bit of a postcode lottery, so depending on where you live, but they can be quite long waits. So don't leave it too long, and just know that even though it's a fluctuating disease, it's important that you're there. So even if you're having a period when it comes up where it feels all right at that time, what you can do is just troubleshoot what was happening last, in the period before, and work through that with your therapist. So just go early.
That's great. Thank you, Fiona. That's really helpful. I'm going to come back to Lo now. So a question we got in advance was, after recently being diagnosed with colitis, how do you manage the uncertainty of how the disease will affect you in the future? So question for Lo, please.
That's a really good question. Realistically, I think the honest truth is that you can never fully prepare for the future. And I think that's not even, I'm not a, whatever the word is, a psychologist or, a philanthropist or anything like that. But I think that applies to life as well as IBD. Tomorrow is very uncertain. And I think you definitely do add that extra layer of uncertainty when you've been diagnosed with something like IBD. Because like Fiona was saying, you might be, fine one day and then you might be totally different the next. It's very flip-floppy in my experience anyway. And, things can just come out the blue. I would say, in order to prepare for the future, I think the best thing that you can do is just, Hakeem said it earlier, but be kind to yourself and not put too much pressure on yourself. I definitely was part of conversations right back when I was first diagnosed of, this is what I want to be doing in 3 years' time, and this is what I want to be doing in 5 years' time, and almost kind of setting these goals for myself, these health goals, which I think were intended by my team to be helpful and to be optimistic. But what I found actually is when I came up to those kind of time check-ins of 1 year, 2 year, and I wasn't where I had assumed I would be, I then looked inwards and say, well, what am I doing wrong? And what could I have done better? And the reality is nothing. I could have done nothing different. It's just my body, and it's just the way that the disease works. So I think being kind on yourself for today, tomorrow, next week, and the year after is probably the most important thing of how you can kind of look, how you can deal with stuff in the future. And I'd say the second really important thing, and it's not necessarily a medical tip, I know we're not giving medical advice anyway, but is to definitely not compare yourself with other people. So there's one thing holding yourself account to unrealistic expectations or kind of goals that you're basing off of, I don't know, something that someone said to you one time. The second thing I think is very apt with social media and kind of the struggles I've definitely had with these various platforms, and especially with Instagram, is to not compare your journey to someone else's. So if you've been diagnosed recently with colitis like this person has, and you straight away search the hashtag, or you try and find some, IBD influencers, if that's even such a thing, and you're looking at their journey and you're automatically comparing yourself, I just think that's the most unhelpful and unproductive thing that you can do for yourself. And I do it all the time still now, and I've had Crohn's disease for 6 years, and I'll see someone who might look more sick than me and I'll think, oh, should I be more sick? Or I'll see someone healthier than me and I'll think, oh, should I be more healthy? And all it does is just creates a whirlwind in your own mind about you judging how sick or how well you should be in comparison to other people. And that's just totally, it's not a good thing to do in life anyway. You should never really compare yourself, but especially with something like IBD, I just think that's so unhelpful. So my advice would be, 1, don't compare. 2, try and be kind on yourself. And number 3, kind of echoing what we've said earlier on in the call, but try and build those support networks and talk to people. It can be so hard. And, I get if people are like, oh, I don't want to talk to my family about it or my partner about it or whoever. When I was diagnosed, I was living with my now ex-boyfriend, but him and his family in their family home. And I did not feel in a position to talk about it with any of them. And I lived there for over a year, never talking about it, was very ashamed, felt very embarrassed, all things in hindsight, which I look on, I think how sad that I didn't have that outlet to be able to talk to people about how I'm feeling or how to deal with things or just chat about it and laugh about it. I think if you can sometimes add some humor to these weird and wonderful situations I'm sure we have all found ourselves in with Crohn's or colitis, it adds so much support and kind of confidence to how you feel you can deal with the disease going forward, because it will be one of those things that is with you, but I think you can very much influence how you feel about that as you take it forward into your future. That's not to say you're going to love it all the time. There's months or days or weeks when I'll wake up and I'll think, oh, this is kind of rubbish. Like, I'm not really a fan of being diagnosed with this way back when. And then there's other times where I have to be honest, I don't really think about it outside of maybe getting a notification or making a new online friend. But I think if you can just frame the future in the most kindest, calm way possible to you and not overlay it with expectations that are set by other people, and definitely not by Google as well, then hopefully you'll be on a positive path.
Fantastic, thanks, Lo. And I've got a question now for Hakeem that's come in. So the question is, I've been recently diagnosed with colitis and I have a lot of anxiety and stress when out in public, and I panic trying to figure out the toilet routes. It's mentally exhausting. Do these feelings ever go away?
Yeah, that's another good question. I wish I could sit here and say that, oh yeah, those feelings will go away after 2 weeks and you'll be absolutely fine. But in all fairness, because the disease fluctuates, those feelings will probably fluctuate as well. I still get them occasionally now, but a way to cope with that, because the anxiety is normally you're scared of what you don't know. So you're imagining all the worst case scenarios. So I will have a little bag that I take with me everywhere. It's got my trusty Andrex wet wipes in, over-the-counter paracetamol, and things to help with my stomach. Obviously discuss those with your nurse before buying them. And then I will plan my route so that I know roughly if there's going to be train stations or toilets and things like that in, think about where I'm going. And if I'm really bad, I will actually call or email, say like a shop or whatever's near to it, and ask about what the toilet situation is, because at the end of the day, they don't know who you are. So they won't see you walking in and be, oh, there's the guy that called and asked about our toilets. So at least then it's like a little peace of mind. At least I know that's there for when I go there. And then the more that you do it, say if you're doing repeat journeys, or the more you get used to doing that, I feel like the anxiety starts to get smaller and smaller, because you feel more organized and more in control. Because I think that's another component of it, is this feeling like we don't have control of our body, and then we worry, and then we have less control even more, and it's just a vicious circle. So yeah, for me, it's just getting some tiny portion of control whilst I'm planning what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's great.
Can I just jump in there? What you're describing is something, Hakeem, that we use in psychology a lot. So when we feel out of control and we can't control something, so for example, like IBD, you know, the disease itself it's uncontrollable for you. But what you can do is build something that we call mastery. And that's exactly what you've just beautifully described. So it's when you go into a situation, you know what to do in a certain situation. And that's really lovely. So when something's out of your control, if you can build mastery, that helps tremendously for psychological outcomes. It's a great example. Thank you.
That's great, thank you. So I'm going to ask a bit about the fatigue side now, and this is a question for Kasia. So someone has asked, I really struggle with fatigue, it really gets me down. And I'm sure this is something that lots of people will identify with. So what can I do to help manage my fatigue and the mental well-being aspects of that?
And again, this is a very difficult but very good question, and pretty much every patient asks about it. And we don't have straight answers because everyone's slightly different. So from our nursing perspective, we can check certain levels of, say, inflammatory markers in your blood. We can check your iron levels, your vitamins. We can give you advice about changing your medication if it's not fully tailored to what you need, because having active disease and constantly raised inflammatory markers will in turn make you suffer. So you're not going to sleep very well, you need to go to the toilet more, it's all exhausting, so it adds up. So it's very, my advice initially is always about checking if, we're not there to shove medication into our patients, we're there to give advice. And I'm pretty sure lots of people don't want to take medication and they come to our clinic and lie about taking them. I'm not there to judge whether you're taking your meds or not. I'm there to help you. So, I would check first if the person that I'm speaking to is doing the things that I assume they're doing, so then I can help and, for example, point them into, to maybe improving everything. I can't just turn around saying, oh, yeah, you need to sleep more, you're going to feel better, because that's probably the advice that lots of Crohn's, I can see Lo is laughing. I'm sure everyone heard this at least once in their life. Oh yeah, you need to sleep better, but how can I sleep if I can't sleep? So it's difficult. There are things that need to be changed, and everyone's different. We're all different, even without having any diagnosis. We have different lifestyles. Some people wake up early in the morning and they gym bunnies and they feel great, and they're absolutely dead in the afternoon. Others, are absolutely different. So it's changing and adapting to how you're feeling and at what stage of your, say, disease you are at that given time. You may be in remission, the fatigue is still there, so then you can find a moment for yourself. We all touched on the subject earlier, both Hakeem and Lo said that as well. Find that moment for yourself, make yourself, enjoy something, go for a little walk, if anything. I know it's difficult to plan a route through a town because of the toilet issue, but if you can go for a little walk around the house, get some fresh air, take a deep breath of, just enjoy a moment, it then in turn will help maybe the fatigue levels. It's a very difficult question. I always struggle because there's no straight answer, but again, I would work with someone to help them find a way that may help them.
Yeah, that's great, Kasia. Thank you. I don't know, Lo and Hakeem, have you got anything you would add to that?
I guess fatigue is definitely one of the main symptoms that, despite being in remission, often in my other symptoms, I've just never seemed to master. No amount of iron tablets or sleep, like you said, ever solves anything. I feel like I could sleep for days on end and wake up and feel exhausted, and that happens first thing in the morning, happens throughout my day, and obviously I'm working and I'm now going into the office, so the fatigue is something I battle with a lot and definitely haven't mastered, but something that I do try and do, and again, I'm obviously not a kind of expert in this field at all, but something that kind of works for me is to try not think about being tired, but to just think about it in a slightly different way. I know regardless of what day I wake up, I will feel tired. And I notice that I feel worse when I am obsessed with thinking about how tired I feel. It's like when I first wake up and I'm saying to my boyfriend, I'm so tired, I'm so tired. I'm going into work and people ask how I am. And the first thing I'm saying is, I'm so tired. That, and it's classic, and it's, you know, psychology, and it's, you know, mentally I'm programming myself to then default to feel more tired, not for taking that moment, like you say, Cassia, to take a moment and say, yeah, okay, I am tired, but instead try and set yourself small little steps. So rather than waking up and thinking, oh, I'm so overwhelmed, I'm so tired, I can't do anything, because I would love to do that, but I can't do that in most of my days because I have other stuff on. I think, okay, I am really tired, I'm not feeling good, but let me just do this one thing. Let me just make this coffee. Let me just have this shower. Let me just do this one meeting. And like, if I break it down into what, you know, whether it's an hour at a time or a task at a time or an activity at the time, I then slowly end up getting to about 3-4 p.m. and think, oh my goodness, I can't believe I made it through this part of the day, because at 6 a.m. I assumed I was spending the whole day in bed. And for me, that just breaking it down into those micro mini moments really helps me through. And then, yeah, when I sit down here on a Zoom call and if I close my eyes and thought about it, I would definitely be reminded, you are really tired. But if I just kind of take it step by step and just take the pressure off yourself, as soon as you've got rid of that pressure, I personally find it amazing how much I am capable of if I just kind of alleviate the stress and the you have to, and do, I will see if I can. And often you'd be amazed. I think often you can. Doesn't mean you'll do everything, but I think you'll be surprised as to how many of those moments you can actually do.
That's great. Thanks, Lo. Hakeem, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I totally agree with Lo in terms of, I guess, like not viewing the day as like a mountain and kind of breaking it down into smaller aspects. I also find that if I do that, then it's not overwhelming thinking about what I need to do, for example, because at the moment I'm on placement, which I know, well, I knew going into it was going to be crazy and long hours. And so I have to get up at 4:30 in the morning, and straight away I am just feeling so tired. But I try not to think about that, and I eat my breakfast, etc., and then just go about it a step at a time. And I try to almost, if I am really tired, rearrange things into a more sensible order. So I won't just be like, I used to try and power through and keep up with everyone and just be like, oh no, I'm fine, I can do absolutely everything that everyone else can do. And now I realize that I do sometimes need to change it up. And when we're doing university from home, it's an amazing opportunity for me, because I can just then be in bed with Zoom on and just relax and rest whilst without having to run around and feel really tired. But it is hard, because I do think sometimes you worry again, we put more stress on ourselves because we worry about everyone else and what they're thinking about us being fatigued, or are they thinking that we're lazy, etc. And it is hard to deal with that. But yeah, for the most part, I just find breaking up what I'm doing into smaller chunks, and also, again, preparing. So if I've got uni, I'll try and meal prep and things like that. So there's less things for me to do. So when I'm feeling energetic, I'll do more. And when I'm not, I'll do a little bit less.
I think that's a really important point, actually, because what you're describing, both of you just described that beautifully, is going from this state of being quite helpless because of the tiredness, and acknowledging that actually the tiredness leaves you feeling missing something and feeling helpless, but noticing that if you keep going just these small tiny steps, then you can end up not feeling useless. And if you feel useless, that's when you're in danger of feeling hopeless. And so just by doing these little bits just stops that, because then you've just got 2 or 3 problems as opposed to just the one, which is fatigue. So then it's that gap from noticing where the symptom is to where you end up that it becomes really difficult to cope and manage with. So yeah, just both of, well, all 3 of you just described really nice approaches to it.
Also, if I can add, I just kind of thought about it, you know, lots of people who get diagnosis, they're young, they work, they go to school, you know, there are also people who are slightly older. So I guess everyone's got a life and something to do. Let your boss know, or your school know. We can, as nurses, write support letter, which will help, you know, in unis will give you extensions. We're not here to suffer. So technically the support is there, you just have to go there. So I've written millions of support, millions, maybe not millions, but support letters for lots of my patients, just saying, you know, this person has this diagnosis, please, take this into account. They need more breaks, they need more frequent toilet breaks. Don't ask them too many questions, just give them that little break. That also helps, because I guess, it's very difficult to do some job in which all of a sudden you have to run to the toilet, or you feel like you got a cramp, and then you have to face a customer. But if your boss knows, or if your school knows, they'll probably, make arrangements for you. They're actually obliged by law as well to help out. So, just seek that help. And I think, things will get easier, and don't put yourself at stress, because it just adds to the suffering. So
it's really helpful. Thanks. So thank you, all of you there, for all of your tips and your observations on fatigue. I'm going to take a question from the chat now. And this is for Lo and Hakeem. So Crohn's and colitis are invisible, which means it's hard for people to understand. How do I explain to others that I'm not just lazy when I can't do things? So I'll go to Lo first for that one.
That's, oh gosh, it's a really tough one. I think we've probably all, anyone with this diagnosis will definitely have felt that fear before of, being the flake in the group or feeling lazy. And I have definitely been called lazy in the past before when I haven't done as many things. And I think especially when you are at that slightly more socially active spectrum of your life, although, we can all be socially active for our entire life, but, when it's like you're going out all the time and your friends and you're the person who actually doesn't want to, or you can't get involved in everything, I think there is a real stigma around that. What I would say, and my advice would be, is to just own and respect your body, and just listen to your body. If your body is crying out to rest, or if you're, running to the toilet, you obviously need to look, put yourself first and look after yourself. And I think we need to get a little bit more comfortable with saying no. I'm a self-proclaimed yes person. If someone asks me to do something, even though I'm already busy, I'll say yes. I'll make it work. I'll come to both things at the same time. I will always say yes, because I'm such a people pleaser. But I think what I've definitely learned, especially in the last couple of years, is actually finding the power to say no. And people don't mind. I think we all assume that people are going to be mad at us, or they're going to think that we're lazy, or that we're not a good friend, or we're not a good partner, or a good sister, or whatever it is. But I think actually, when you think about that balance, are you going to bring the best version of yourself if you're doing things where you can't fully commit, and you can't give, your 90%, your 100%, even your 80%? Are you better off saying, I'm really sorry, actually, no, I'm not feeling very good, or I'm feeling a bit run down, or a bit tired. Actually, I just don't want to come. Like, why do we have to say yes and go to things that we don't even want to go to? I think by practicing no and saying no, and getting people around you used to you saying no, I think having that no as leading the authority takes away any lazy thing. It's not that you're being lazy. I think often we get so obsessed with people thinking that we're lazy when we're finding excuses rather than just owning our illness and owning our situation. So that would be my kind of first leading thought, is like, get comfortable with saying no, get comfortable with your body. And also, there's no shame in it. I think also the more you talk to people and you find that support network, which we've all spoken about so many more times, the more you won't feel like it is lazy. And to be honest, if you're surrounded by people who don't get your illness, no matter how many times you've tried to speak to them about it, or employers or whoever it is in your life who constantly is making you feel like you are being lazy by prioritizing your health, put them in the bin. They are not the type of people for you. They are definitely not good for your life or good for your health. So yeah, say no and put them in the bin. Those would be my probably unhelpful tips.
Strong advice there from Lo. Hakeem, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I definitely would agree with Lo about, if they're not listening, then you should put them in the bin. Just to go on from that, I just feel like we need to stress that it's not our job to educate everyone on Crohn's disease. Like, we have enough things to worry about in our lives without us having to then worry about telling every single person we meet, this is what it is and this is how it affects me. But if you are comfortable doing that, then again, it is really important that you start those conversations and you talk to people. If you find it hard, I used to find it really hard to talk about Crohn's. And then there is actually I'll probably get the name wrong of it, but on the Crohn's website, the Crohn's and Colitis website, there is the talking kits, which I used. You can download the PDFs and it's got lots of advice on there that you can use to start conversations. But what I actually did was kind of lazy. In my old job, I actually just said to my manager, can I send you over this PDF? You read it through and then we'll have a meeting about it. And he did that. And then they basically put a schedule in. So every time we had a meeting, we would also talk about my Crohn's and how I am and how it affects me, my medication. And that just opened up the doors for me then. And then from there, when I applied for university, I put it in my personal statement. I talked about it in my interview. We're registered with the disabilities team, so they're all aware of how Crohn's can affect me and what adjustments might need to be made as and when things happen. But yeah, as I say, like, some of us are really comfortable talking about Crohn's, but I just think it shouldn't be on us to always have to explain to people, because also sometimes you'll get a negative reaction. So I've had people send me pseudoscience-y links and tell me that their friend of a friend was cured because they drank herbal tea, and that stuff's not very helpful. So if you are going to talk about it, you almost need to prepare for that it's not always going to go the way that you want it to. But yeah, definitely start with those small conversations, and then it starts to get easier.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Hakeem. And yes, it's the talking toolkit, so we'll have posted that up in the chat. But that's great advice from you both. Thank you. I'm going to take another live question now. This one is for Fiona. So as a parent, how can I support the well-being of my child with Crohn's or colitis?
Thank you for asking this question, because it's a question that comes up a lot for us, particularly when we do our newly diagnosed sessions at Addenbrooke's Hospital. The trickiest bit is that you're not going to know, obviously, what your particular young person is thinking, and that can be really, really difficult. So when it's yourself, you know roughly what you're thinking, and you can then go and act on that. But you're not sure when it's somebody else. And so what you need to do as much as possible is just to try and get the environment right for that young person to be able to talk to you. Now, we know as parents that that's not often us as parents that young person can talk to. So then we need to think again about those systems. So there's nothing new. We're not reinventing the wheel here. We're just adapting it for that young person. So think of what other systems are in that person's life. So school, friends, whatever it is, and keeping up those systems and really investing in them so that that person can just feel that they can talk to and speak to whoever is available at that point. The real difficulty with childhood, and obviously I don't know how old the child that we're talking about here, but the difficulty is you've got lots of challenges on the way that will just interact with the challenge of the IBD. So you've got all the exams, you've got the difficulty with body image that you get when you're young. All of this stuff is all going to be interacting and playing out at the same time. So be aware that it might not all be to do with the IBD as well. But the good news is that many services that don't have adult IBD psychologists do have access to child IBD psychologists, or mental health services, for example, CAMS services, are much more staffed than the adult equivalent. So if you do feel that the young person will benefit from somebody to talk to, I would urge you to go sooner rather than later, but you would need to get their buy-in to do that, because otherwise it won't work. But if you can get their buy-in and go and get support early, that will be really helpful too. I hope that answers that question. If I haven't and you want to ask something else, stick something back in the chat.
Brilliant. And thank you to everyone who's putting comments and questions in the chat. It's great to see. And I've got another live question here. This is for Kasia. Do you have any advice for how to mentally prepare for surgery?
Oh, wow, this is going to be a difficult one. Surgery, I think just the word itself scares lots of people. We got two ways of looking at it. If it's, surgery can be elective, so a chosen surgery, or surgery can be an emergency. Obviously, for an emergency, you can't prepare yourself. Stuff happens. And this is, I guess, the bad scenario. The better scenario is the one that you know that potentially you have access to it as a form of treatment. Not everything in Crohn's and colitis can be solved with a surgery, but there are a few things that can. And I think it's important to introduce the person who got diagnosed at some point, probably earlier than later, that this path is there, because not everyone wants to take medication. Some forms of Crohn's can be operable. Colitis can be operable. It just, I guess, the stigma of having a stoma bag scares people. That being in a hospital scares people. It's not only people which, people who are diagnosed with Crohn's and colitis. Generally, we don't like hospitals. No one likes to be in a hospital. So I think the earlier the conversation is started and the more access to services a person has, the better prepared they can be. They can go via the nurses and be introduced to all those who underwent surgery. There are lots of blogs, and I'm pretty sure people like Lo can be good sources of information like this, because there are other bloggers out there who went through surgery. Some as an emergency, some were prepared for it. So I think putting a person suffering with Crohn's and colitis in touch with someone who underwent surgery to prepare them, to chat about it, if this is a solution, is a good start. So I think the early conversation to kind of, to introduce the options. Mentally, again, everyone's different. It all depends how we all take our, how we deal with our lives. So everyone needs a bit of a different support. It could be by people like Fiona, so through services, through other people who already have been through it, and through us, through the nurses, because I guess, we can show you what the surgery looks like, what stoma bag is. Not everyone ends up with a stoma. We can tell you how long, you'll be in a hospital, how long you should plan for taking time off work, and so forth. So I guess, again, everything boils down to talking about it.
That's great, Kasia, thank you. So we're almost out of time, but I think we've got time for one last question. And this is another question from the live chat. This one's for you, Fiona. Do you have any tips for coping and managing anxiety? For example, when I'm unable to go out?
Yeah, so it's very difficult when you're not able to go out, because all the things that we would suggest and recommend usually involve getting out and about as much as possible. And so it is really, really hard when you're not out. First of all, just being aware that your brain will take you to a worry place, and that's just it doing its job in order to try and think of all the different scenarios that you might be presented with and try and prepare you for it. So just know that that's why your brain's doing it. But the difficulty is all that does is increase our level of anxiety, which of course increases our level of low mood. So just when you spot yourself doing it, just go, I'm aware I'm doing it. I'm aware this is what's happening, but I think it's going to be unhelpful for me. And then try and bring yourself back to whatever you're concentrating on. And so you will have to do that when you're particularly anxious. You might have to do that what would feel like 60 times a minute. I mean, it'll literally, your brain will be firing off lots of different thoughts. That's okay. That means you're alive and you're a normal human being. Yeah. But what we just need to do is just concentrate on just being aware of, acknowledging where our brains have gone, and bringing ourselves back to focusing on what you need to focus on. And of course, if that can be something nice, like a conversation with somebody, that will be a lot easier than it will be sitting on your own, trying to read a book or, something, an activity, the way you're in solitary activity, that will be harder.
Thank you. That's really helpful advice, and yeah, a common question. So I'm going to wrap up now. Thank you to my amazing panel. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. It's been really fantastic. I feel that we could have carried on chatting all night, actually. So it's really great. Thank you to everyone who's attended. Thank you for all your comments in the chat and all your questions. It's really great to see everyone getting really involved, and this is a really good start to Crohn's and Colitis Awareness Week. Hearing people's stories is what's important, and that matters so much. So keep an eye on our social media, visit the link in the chat to find out how you can share your story and make a difference this week. And if this Facebook Live has affected you, or you want more support, more information, we've got some information on our website on mental wellbeing. And of course, please remember that you can contact your GP or your IBD team, or contact the Samaritans on 116 123. So this broadcast is recorded, and it will stay on the Facebook page and will be posted on the charity YouTube channel. And we're also going to be hosting some more Facebook Lives in early 2022. So look out for more details for those. And remember that we've got lots of information and resources on the Crohn's and Colitis UK website. So our most up-to-date information is there. So thank you to the panel. Thank you to everyone who's joined us. And thank you to everyone that's made this Facebook Live happen. So thank you and good night. Thanks, everyone.